Lovely. How are you? Thank you for listening. You are catching a special edition of Victorious Working Moms podcast. This is a career mom reset with Dr. Carmen. As the people have spoken, we're giving you more, but let me give you some tea before we get started. Did you know that you can buy us a coffee? Check it out on the website, www.victoriousworkingmom.com. If you love what Dr. Carmen is bringing, vote with your dollars. This helps to relaunch the show, give you more content faster. We love Dr. Carmen, so shout her out. Yes. And from the website, it's easy for you to share it with your peoples. So I just wanted to throw that out. And then before we get into this juicy conversation, I want to remind y'all of the nacho rule. I'm Dr. Nneka, by the way. I want to remind you that Dr. Carmen and I are board certified physicians. However, we not your doctor. And by listening to this podcast, it is meant for edutainment purposes only. Educational and possibly entertaining. It is not meant to be a substitute for having a established care with a physician. This is not mental health. This is just a podcast. Okay, you're listening to two physicians in their zone of genius. All right, so we got that out the way. Dr. Carmen, what are we talking about today?
Sounds like we're talking about breastfeeding.
Okay.
August is, I think it's National Breastfeeding Month. The first week of the month was World Breastfeeding Week. The last week of the month is Black Breastfeeding Week.
Okay, and time of this recording, we dead in the middle of the month, basically. All right.
Yes,
Dr. Carmen is a board certified family physician. She is a speaker. She's an educator and she's a mother. So we both got a lot. Between the two of us, we got 7 children. So we got a lot to talk about.
It's a lot of babies.
A lot of babies. And we've had a lot of patient encounters about breastfeeding. What are some of the things you want to make sure we get it out the way that you want our audience to know about, our listener to know about?
Breastfeeding, breast milk period is actually considered baby's first food. Formula is a good supplement if you have to use formula for whatever reason. If you're not able to produce enough adequate breast milk for the baby, and we'll talk about that as well. If it is prescribed by your baby's physician to actually help boost your baby's nutrition as well. Or if you decide for whatever reason, and we'll get into that into this episode too, you decide that breastfeeding is not for you. Say, for instance, if it's taking a toll on your mental well being, and of course, you want your baby to eat, but breast milk is the first food for mammals. Human beings are mammals. So, yeah, we breastfeed our babies like other mammals do. I'm sure people often see funny memes on Facebook, on Instagram, especially when it comes to, not to be funny, mama dogs. I think that's the latest one that's going around, where the mama dog is just laying there and all of her babies are nursing. Hey, it can take a toll on you. It really can. So we're going to get into how breastfeeding can be a challenge as a working human mother.
Yes, it's the first food, but is it meant to be the only food? This is really, we were talking about right before we press record, that can be triggering for some women because it's like one of those early things you get judged about as a mom. Breast or bottle or both. They ask you that in the delivery room. And then we don't want to leave adoptive moms or moms that use a gestational carrier. Is what if that opportunity, you desired it and it's not there? Or what if you don't desire it? Or what if you do and you're not sure that the environment you're in at home or at the workplace? Because for some of us, and I think that you're going to allude to that probably with the minority breastfeeding month, some of the challenges to breastfeeding is lack of support. Because I would imagine if you got to rush back to work and you're in an environment that's not conducive to breastfeeding, or they give it lip service, but they don't really give you time, you just don't, because you're just chugging along. Or you stop breastfeeding because you're going back to work. Maybe if you already had a short maternity leave or no maternity leave, you may not even got a chance to establish it. And then in your environment, the encouragement or lack there. But let's start with assuming, and we're not trying to leave adoptive mothers out, but assuming baby is home and you have a physical ability to breastfeed. And what are some of the early blocks that you've noticed, even in the hospital, about breastfeeding?
I'll say, thankfully, I can actually say for my personal situation, I'll get into, I guess you could say, institutional as well. Personally, I knew that I anticipated possibly having a C-section. Body habitus, age, pre-existing medical conditions. The physicians are great. I had to see maternal fetal medicine. They already let me know that the possibility of a C-section was a very real thing. But with my first child, they're like, hey, you've had, not untried, but basically I had never given birth at all. So they were going to actually allow me to try to have a vaginal delivery, but they're like, hey, just know that the possibility of a C-section is real. And understanding that and actually understanding how birth hormones work, I'm like, okay, if I have to have this C-section, I'm breastfeeding my child. That was my biggest thing. I actually desired to breastfeed because of that. Largely, the second reason I wanted to breastfeed was because of health reasons, just generational health, chronic medical conditions run in my family, obesity is prevalent in my family, and knowing that I could improve my child's gut health, we can get into that too, by breastfeeding with the first food, that was very important for me as well. So knowing, just walking in with that mindset of saying, I'm breastfeeding my child, that eliminated some of the hospital barriers. And at that time, too, the hospital where I delivered was actually, they had just been nominated as a baby friendly hospital. I think that was a few years ago when a lot of the hospitals were becoming more baby friendly by, instead of having the baby in the nursery the majority of the time, they had the baby in the room with mom. So that actually helped as well. And being an advocate for myself and saying, hey, yeah, I do want the lactation consultant to come in, help me with latch, making sure the baby was getting enough breast milk from the beginning, getting enough colostrum actually, which is the pre-breast milk, if you want to look at it like that, that was of help as well. Also, even before I gave birth, anticipating vaginal delivery, I had a doula who was definitely pro breastfeeding as well. So I was aware that honestly, in my family, the women didn't they really didn't have prolonged breastfeeding. I actually breastfed the longest of any woman in my family, and it was just about 13 months with both children. And I knew that even though support was going to come from a well-meaning source, it wouldn't necessarily be 100% there in time because the understanding of my reasons wasn't there. It just wasn't there. So just knowing the challenges up front that I had, those probably eliminated some of the barriers that I otherwise would have had.
Thank you for sharing that, because acknowledging that when we come into motherhood and breastfeeding, we are influenced by the norms in our family, societal norms. If women ahead of you in your family did not breastfeed, then you may or may not be encouraged to, or not openness about the breastfeeding story and what was going on in their lives, because there's a lot of things that can affect that. Being a single parent, not being partnered, having other children may make it where it's more difficult, or you might be more focused on the baby, and then someone that can delegate the other children. Stress, if you're not drinking well, you're not sleeping, it's hard to produce the milk. And then comments about breast milk, that ain't enough, and the baby's still hungry. And some children feed differently. Not every kid feeds every 2 hours. Some kids, they like to hang on there. And if you're like, I cannot just have this child attached to my body all day long and function and get things done, then other factors of medications you're taking. I know that's a concern, especially for women that are on say like ADHD medication, or women that are on mental health medications that might have transferred to for breast milk, they're concerned about what the baby's getting. And how do you encourage that person to say, I feel like sometimes, especially if this is like the first grandchild in the family or first baby in a while, sometimes they don't even get to hold their own kid. Now, some of that could be it lets you rest, but some is everybody else is holding my baby. I feel like I have to ask permission for to hold my own kid. Did you want to talk a little about that? Because that's a little bit of my proportion of my breastfeeding story.
Yes, it actually is. Both Black female physicians. I can actually say that a lot of people were concerned that I was spoiling the baby by constantly holding the baby. But guess what? In order to breastfeed and feed your child as you should, if you're going to be breastfeeding directly from the breast, we're not talking about just pumping, you're going to hold that baby. I'm going to put that out there, number one. Number two, babies cannot be spoiled. Babies are not meant to just go in a swing and then just sit there and not be held. I posted, I think it was a cartoon before, explaining how certain mammals are considered cash mammals, like deer. And the mama deer will leave the baby in a safe place while she'll go and eat and build up her nutrition. And then she will come back and feed her baby and then go and leave again because her baby is safe. Yet other mammals, specifically primates, are not considered cash mammals. Guess what? Humans are not considered cash mammals. So, no, we don't necessarily need to just put our baby down and walk away as the expectation that so many people feel like we should do. Now, of course, if we need a break, we need to find someone to take the baby and have the baby be safe while we go and have a mental break because it can be overwhelming as a new mother, then that's absolutely okay. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about specifically people who say, put the baby down, you're holding the baby too much, you're spoiling the baby. Well, I'm just trying to breastfeed my baby. Yeah, 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 but you're spoiling the baby. That's how you bond with your child during the early days, months, dare I say, even some years of life. I know some of my relatives were probably a little bit annoyed with me because I wore my baby. I actually had my baby wrapped onto my chest and I wore my child. Some people were disappointed that they didn't get a chance to hold the child as much as they otherwise would have. But as a full-time working mother, I wanted that connection with my baby. I wanted to touch my baby, to hold my baby every chance that I got. And again, I established that early on. And it's also so important to do that. In terms of other breastfeeding stigmas as well, I've noticed that sometimes in the Black community, breastfeeding is stigmatized as being nasty, as breasts are looking at as being sexual organs, which they are, but there are also organs that are food producing as well. Again, we mentioned breast milk being baby's first food. And also, too, the concept of putting cereal in the bottle to help the baby sleep. Not a good idea unless prescribed by your pediatrician. But I also want to say that there are enzymes in breast milk that have actually been shown to break down the cereal. So it's pointless to put the cereal in the breast milk. It's not going to make the baby sleep longer or anything like that. I've often said too that to me, putting cereal in the bottle goes back to when Black women in particular couldn't hold their babies. They couldn't bond with their babies. Why? Because they were enslaved in the fields working for somebody else or either wet nursing somebody else's baby. And in order to get that work done, that forced labor, dare I say, done, your baby would probably have to eat some sort of cornmeal mush to help fill their stomach while you're forced to basically give your precious child the liquid gold that your own child should be having. So that's how I feel sometimes the concept of, ooh, put cereal in the bottle, it'll last longer. That's another thing that I feel like we need to educate ourselves on more about and do away with.
Okay, you dropping some science. I really like that you appreciate that you touched about the cereal and that there's historical context for this. I also hear a recurrent thing about being able to set boundaries, and that can be difficult. And for some of us people pleasers in recovery, I raise my hand. Having a child might have been the first or early times you really had to set a boundary, especially with other people in your life, and especially as a new mom, you're new. So other women might come and they're thinking they're being supportive, but they also might have their own agenda in that they want this time to flex what they know as a mom. And you also trying to build your confidence and create your own story. This is how we all do it. Who's to say that's the way you have to do it? So that those are those underlying things that sometimes can make it you didn't speak up, you didn't want to offend somebody. Mama is the one that knows, but she had mama have her own experience and why she do it the way she do it or didn't do it. Was it because you had other children and that's why you didn't nurse as long or you did, or you had to get back to work in the market or in a historical sense in diaspora because you were someone else's property? So that child was not, you didn't get to nurture the same way, or you might have even been nurturing other people's children. There's so much context to it. That's when you really get back to what do you want? What do you need? What works for you and your family? What works for you is what works best. And we're not vilifying anybody to come before us, but everybody have different approaches. And sometimes you got male and sometimes you got junk mail when it comes to advice and health advice. Sometimes it's just who's the current resident here. We're just sending this. I'm in the situation with you, so I'm just going to say this, but it may not be helpful to you and it may not be something you need to open and use. So keep that in mind with any advice, online, in person. It's like, what works for you? Now, if you're not getting any sleep, get the sleep first. And a big thing I want to throw out is, especially in African homes and Caribbean homes, is the water. A lot of relatives and well-meaning women in our community say, don't mind these Americans. Give the baby water. I'm talking about newborn baby.
Girl, Black
Black
Americans
Americans
do
too.
the
Okay,
same thing.
okay, okay. So the water
Okay.
thing, giving the baby
Southern.
water because they're thirsty and seeing that the milk is too thick, is too this. But then I would see women engorged as you drink the water, you give the baby the breast. And they're thinking the baby's gonna get dehydrated, or some people, I don't want my baby to be too fat. American babies are too plump. And they mean, and that water might have been all they had available. Or if you're working in the market and you need that baby on your back, quiet, what have you. So I'm not judging it, but we also are saying we got to understand the context sometimes where the advice is coming from. And yes, we're in the South in the United States is a hot place. The Caribbean, Africa, South America, those are typically warm places. But mother, take care of you. You stay hydrated and make sure you're not engorged because that's painful, full of milk, where it's backing up the ducts. And give that baby that milk if you so choose. Pumping is a whole nother thing. And I think to deal with the boundary issues and the possible resistance, because you're just overwhelmed as a new mom, you're just overwhelmed. Even sometimes as if it's been a gap in having kids, you know what I'm saying? Some people, hey, you might have had a child in your 20s and now you're in your 30s, 40s and you're having a child. So things change. And remember, our family members, those well-meaning people that love us, but are not always professionals, might be giving us dated advice. So check it. Is this useful to me? Does this help build my confidence or does it make me feel more confused? And you get to form your own story. You get to form your own story and also build your own team of support. In that you could take breastfeeding classes. Yes, they have those. You can meet with the lactation specialist before, during, and after, even after the hospital. You mentioned a doula, which is, believe that's like a birth coach. So,
Yeah.
granted, you may not know how it's gonna go. You might think it's good to get relationship with the advice so that you can filter what works for you. Because sometimes, especially us educated folk that are having children in our 30s, 40s, we want to do it right, and we might get into over information overload. And I think it's think about your life, where you are, and try to also gauge it with people that are in the season with you or a little bit before you, because that can help to calm down some of that unspoken anxiety. Because societally, we feel that pressure that we have to be excited. We're supposed to know exactly what to do as the baby comes out. And that's a lot of pressure, especially if you're, well, I've excelled in my profession, I excel in other things, and I feel scared in this. And then you feel shamed, sometimes even say, I'm scared. And then now you're questioning women that I know better, I raised you. Duh. You're like, I don't feel like this fits my situation. As the time draws near, can you also talk about when is a good, how long are we supposed to breastfeed? Okay, say we've gotten past the first 3 week hump, which is hard, and I'm breastfeeding. How long am I supposed to do this? And who decides that?
If you want the PC response, World Health Organization says they recommend breastfeeding for at least 2 years or as long as beneficial to mother and child. For religiously, I'm Muslim, religiously, it's recommended for us to try to breastfeed for up to 2 years if we can, and then start weaning around the age of 2. Breastfeed as long as it's comfortable for you and your child. That being said, American society is different. If you are breastfeeding past the age of 2, you may get some pushback. I have seen that, but medically, 2 years is good.
Now that we've talked about the kind of guidelines and some of the things that affect the duration of breastfeeding, can we talk a little bit about this ding dang job and why, for a lot of the people or persons that are listening, and such as you and I, we were both employed professionals, and sometimes it feels like there's lip service about being supportive about lactation rooms and nursing, but it doesn't always come out that way in everyday practice. Can you talk a little bit about that and the effect it has on the mother to breastfeed, especially minorities?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. Job barriers include not just not really well accommodating employers. But also, let's talk about the healthcare system in the US and how broken it is, especially when it comes to maternity leave. You have maternity leave in other countries that is for at least a year. However, in the US, we're talking about maternity leave that could be anywhere from 6 weeks or sometimes less, especially if someone is a business owner, 6 weeks all the way up to 12 weeks, and then mama has to go back to work. Pumping is an option. However, it is challenging to, if you're breastfeeding your child, if they're cluster feeding every hour right before you go back to work, it's going to be hard to take hourly breaks to set up your pump, sit attached to the pump for 10 to 15 minutes, detach from the pump, clean your parts, bottle the milk, and then go back to work. That can be more than half an hour sometimes to do that. And oftentimes jobs don't accommodate that. And as a result, when women go back to work, so often their breastfeeding journey ends. Another barrier in the workplace, other than time, is actually place. Where can a mother go and privately pump? Being stressed can actually affect milk output. And if the working mom doesn't have a comfortable place to pump, she may be stressed that she's even in that situation. And as a result, her milk output isn't what it should be. Also, work accommodations for pumping. Don't make your employee pump in the bathroom. I'm not sure if that's illegal or not. It may be. Maybe some of my other well versed colleagues who are in breastfeeding medicine can touch on that or leave a comment or something on the podcast. But the bathroom is not an appropriate place for employers to have breastfeeding mothers to pump. Thankfully, As an employed physician at the time, I actually had my own office and I was able to just close my office door. Everybody knew in the office, knew what time it was. Pumping in progress. I will see you all in about 20 minutes. I had pump breaks scheduled. I had two of them. One was and no, I had two. I pumped during lunch, and then I had a break in the afternoon where I pumped again. Other than that, pumped and drove. And I sat there with my breast cover as I was driving down the freeway to work. You make accommodations, but again, you need to have that support system because having that support system, they may even mention ideas to you that you never thought of. I remember when I had my daughter, I was concerned like, okay, how am I going to get these pump sessions in? I only have one lunch break. Shout out to Dr. Milk, what is a breastfeeding, I guess you could say, advice group, and a lot of the women are educated in breastfeeding medicine too, specifically for physicians. Somebody in that group was like, hey, get a car charger, plug it up to your pump. I'm like, oh my gosh, they make those? So that was a saving grace for me in my breastfeeding journey, actually. And I also want to mention too, specifically as it relates to women of color as well. Sometimes women of color actually work more than one job. Let's talk about the single mother of color also who is working more than one job, more than one full-time job, and then has to go home and parent. That makes it even more challenging for her to breastfeed. And she may have to end her breastfeeding journey early, unfortunately. Is that fair? It absolutely is not. But again, that's a situation where our government needs to do better when it comes to healthcare, one. And two, employers need to be educated and be accommodating to the working parents so they can feed their child as well.
Yes, I think it's an ongoing conversation and getting to not just I got this room for you, but also in the schedule and some of those comments because again, you have people that maybe that wasn't their experience. So like, why are these people asking for all this? But sometimes you gotta take up the space. And Dr. Carmen said, having community support to come up with kind of newer ideas as technology changes. They have these newer pumps where you can have the pump inside your bra, and don't have to hook up as much wires, and it just goes. You look at your body type, what your needs and comfort is, and you adapt. It's a journey. There's no one size fits all for every. Oh my gosh, so much we can still go on and on about. But I know the listener, you might be listening this on commute or in between. We want to be respectful of your time, and I want to be respectful of Dr. Carmen's too. And I also wanted to just throw out, if you're like, I tried it, didn't work for me, or I'm pregnant again and I want to approach it differently, don't beat yourself up. I know breastfeeding for my first child versus my fifth is completely different. And there were times I pumped like a cow, and there were times I didn't pump that much, and it just ebbs and flows. And it's okay. And if you are like, you know what, I tried it, didn't like it, didn't work for me, didn't have that support, if it bothers you, I'm giving you permission to let it go. It doesn't state how good a mother you are. If you didn't produce it, if you have a health condition where it may not be advantageous for you to breastfeed, if there's complications, if your child wasn't able to latch, I just want this conversation to be healing for you to start the journey of letting it go. It doesn't define you as a mother. It doesn't define you as a mother. If you're an adopted mother and I never had that experience, it doesn't define you. It does not define you. We just need to know that it's important. It might be breast milk might be the first food. It's not the only food. And breastfeeding might be a method of feeding your child. It's not the only one. Ultimately, a sane and healthy mother is best, and a fed child is best.
And I will say too, to right off of that as well, people talk about the breastfeeding journey. It really should be the breastfeeding leg of the journey of parenthood. Because now, for me, with my children being 6 and 3, they both just stopped on their own at 13 months. That's in my rearview mirror right now. I'm looking back saying, oh, that was an awesome point in time, but parenthood is so much more than what your child eats those first few days, weeks, months, or years of their life.
Absolutely. Dr. Carmen, such good stuff. Again, if people want to reach out to you, what is the social media handles is the best way to reach you?
I can be reached on Facebook, Instagram, sometimes on Twitter. LinkedIn, I don't release my Twitter account, but it's at Dr. Carmen Echols, at DrCarnEchols, no underscores.
All right, you got it. And it'll be in the show notes. And thank you, Dr. Carmen, again for bringing us the healthcare topics that we can use. This is definitely not junk mail. And breastfeeding is definitely a journey, is definitely something that needs to be talked about as far as part of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and also part of breaking some of the generational stigma. So thank you so much for bringing that up and putting the historical context. Y'all have just listened to another episode of Victoria's Working Mom podcast, but in particular, the Career Mom Reset with Dr. Carmen. Yes. If you want more of this, shout us out. www.victoriasworkingmom.com. Check out the Buy Me a Coffee. Show Dr. Carmen some love so we can get more of this. Okay. Also, you can actually leave a voicemail, messages. You can send a message if you have questions. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds as if it was a primary care visit, but we can give you a little overview. Please, Dr. Carmen is a passionate speaker about health topics. She's going to be one of your faves as far as primary care physicians. And yeah, I'm Dr. Nneka, and we out. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Victorious Working Mom Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, share, and leave an iTunes review. Until next time.